Welcome, everybody, to Black Women Unmuted, our election 2024 coverage. I'm Nicki Mayo, editor at large, and I am joined by Lawrence Ross. He is the author of The Divine Nine, The History of African American Fraternities and Sororities. Who better to talk to when we want to go into the impact of the Divine Nine on this election cycle? So, Lawrence, thank you very much for giving us some of your time. But can you talk to me about just what has been the role of our sororities and fraternities?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me. I think I may be the very first man to be on this show. So
You
I am
are.
absolutely thrilled to represent the brothers on the show. So you asked a question about what is kind of like the election and then the role of the Divine Nine within this. And one of the things that I always tell people is that the Divine Nine is going to do basically voter registration, voter education, voter workshops, regardless of who is on the ballot. This is what we do. When we're talking about, for example, from my fraternity, Alpha Phi Alpha, a voteless people is a hopeless people is one of our oldest programs. And we did that during Jim Crow back in the 1920s and 1930s. But all of our organizations really are the groups who we, as my grandfather used to say, most people are fixing and finning. They're fixing to do voter registration, finna to go do voter registration, but we actually do it. And so we do this on a regular basis. However, one of the biggest things is that when you have someone who's a member of one of our organizations, I think it's basically supercharged all the efforts that we're doing when it comes to getting people out to the vote. We are 501c7s, so we do not endorse folks, regardless of whether or not they are members of our organizations. But we do go into communities that typically are left behind or are structurally, say, for example, in states like Texas and Mississippi and Alabama, where they're trying to structurally limit the amount of minorities, particularly Black folks, from voting. We're the folks who go into those areas, particularly lower socioeconomic areas, where we do everything from community service to mentorship to be able to galvanize those folks who don't have a voice and who are intentionally set up to not have a voice. That's the reason why we are so important. And it's not necessarily just to get the people who normally would vote, but it's to get the people who don't vote and get them energized to be able to understand the issues and then get out to the polls.
When you think about the importance of having a member of the Divine Nine going forward, we're used to them being in Congress.
Right.
We're talking about the presidency. What is the importance or the significance of having Kamala Harris running for that position?
So let me tell you a little anecdotal story. My wife is a Delta, member of Delta Sigma Theta, but she
Smart
has
woman.
yeah, she has a friend group that basically a group chat of 4 AKAs and 4 Deltas around there, something like around 3 or 4 of each. And they talk about each other. They're best friends. You cannot say anything. But the minute that Kamala actually announced, her phone just went nuts because they just were like, it's like the Avengers coming together. They were like, we are about to make sure that she gets elected. And one of the Deltas actually worked for Kamala in the DA's office, and you can't say anything bad about that. But you see that oftentimes within the Divine Nine. What will happen, we saw that with Loretta Lynch when she was in her hearings. You saw the Deltas all come during the hearings to actually support her. You see that oftentimes within the Divine Nine. There's a little bit of a special thing that happens when you have a member of your organization, particularly someone who came through college, someone who actually made a proactive attempt to become a member of our organizations. They saw something in our organizations way before they were famous, way before they had notoriety. And then at the exact same time, we saw something in them. And we saw something that we could nurture, something that we could actually advance. And there's a level of satisfaction that occurs when an 18 to 22-year-old grows into a role, and mainly from the idea that we're seeing their talent and we saw their talent manifest way before other people. Now, that does not mean that we solely were the responsibility for Kamala Harris, getting into the position of running for president. But there is something absolutely phenomenal about seeing someone that is relatable. Although I always say that Madam Vice President pledged in 1986, I pledged in 1985. So through deference, she should actually, defer to me, but I don't think that's actually going to happen. I'm big, bad, and bold that way. So
I see. Okay.
I refuse. I do believe that she will not, but she was made right. I think she will still do that, even as president. But I jest. But I think there's something relatable about the idea that when we talk about what our organizations are about, which is, we build, through the unity of our organizations as brothers and sisters, we build unformed clay often into to a space that allows them to actually grow and get nourished. That can be simply from the association that they have with their line sisters or line brothers or their chapter or their work in their organizations. All of this is basically a selflessness that says, if everything is not just about me, this degree was not just about me. It was about me and sharing my intelligence with a bunch of other brilliant Black women or brilliant women who are inside the sorority, or if you're a brilliant men who are inside your fraternity.
All of our organizations are so devoted to our community as a whole
Right.
that when she took, all of the promises back in, you said 86, she committed herself to the Black community right then and there to serve throughout her life. Because it's a
Right.
lifetime commitment, as they say.
Hey,
Yes.
it's one of those things where we have the old, African American proverb that all skinfolk ain't kinfolk, right?
Mhm.
And now the skinfolk part is everybody Black. That's all. Everybody's Black, and everybody's Blackness is manifested in every different way. The kinfolk part
Mhm.
is whether or not you fight for your own community. The kinfolk's part is whether or not you culturally invest in your own community. The kinfolk part is whether or not you remember your own community as you navigate yourself toward whatever success. The kinfolk part is basically never leaving your community in the first place. And I think oftentimes when we talk about the various manifestations of what it means to be culturally Black also, we can sometimes give short, shift to things like, the church or, fraternities and sororities or whatever, Jack and Jill links or whatever your local, YMWCA or Job Corps, the things that are inside your community to allow you to be the best version of who and what you are. I always talk about the fact, I went to Berkeley, and which is like
Mhm.
right where she, grew up. But I went to Berkeley, but I'm from Inglewood, and I grew up off Crenshaw, and everything that I did was not necessarily by my own manifestation. It was basically everything that people contributed to me off Crenshaw. They are the ones that were the ones who believed in me and invested in me. And I think she recognizes that at the exact same time. And I think the selflessness
Mhm.
about being in one of the fraternities or sororities is all about that, recognizing that you may be at Howard, but the folks in DC, who, can see Howard every single day may not have those dreams unless you walk into their third grade classroom and say, I am Howard, I look just like you. And those things are the things that make a difference, oftentimes, not only in the people that you serve, but in your own life.
Mhm. And talking about us as a greater community for Black Women Unmuted, I'm taking it back that you are our first gentleman to be on with us. Um, we ought to say, hey, sis, and the brothers that love us. So one of the awkward storylines has been that Black men don't support the vice president in
Right.
her quest to become president.
Yeah.
And obviously, we've debunked that several different times. But
Yeah.
have you seen any of the tug of war when it came to supporting this particular candidate?
So I think it's a number of different things that can be true at the same time. For example, when I was at my Alpha convention in Dallas in 2023, the one thing I made note, which was for Democrats when Biden was running, was that I didn't understand why they hadn't sent Madam Vice President to all the fraternity conventions to be able to, for the Alphas, the Kappas, the Sigmas, and the Omega, all of us,
Because she went to the sorority ones.
she went to the sorority ones. And
Yes.
what I was foretelling is not necessarily a gap between Black men supporting whoever would be the candidate, but when you leave a vacuum, in particular for Black men organizations that are literally in 700 different communities, each organization are in 700 different communities, you basically let that vacuum be filled with people who say, see, they never talk to you, they take you for granted. And so what happened was when they turned around into, with Kamala, the discussion was not necessarily whether or not Black men were going to actually support her, right? Black men
Mhm.
supported Hillary Clinton 8 out of 10. They will support Kamala Harris. But the problem is that when we talk about like the loud voices, the ones still energized by misogyny, the ones who are still energized by the xenophobia of the FBA and the ADOS movement and things like that, those are voices oftentimes get more currency if the job prior to it hasn't buttressed the people who are actually out there arguing on behalf of Kamala. So what happens is that you find, in particularly like fraternity and sorority men, fraternity men, going out there and making the argument for Kamala, but then at the exact same time, or for the Democratic Party in general, I should say, but at the exact same time, having a very, very, like a clock is right twice a day. Someone saying, but they ain't never been out here and said that there's anything that's specifically for you. Now you can say all the, policies that rise the boats all at the exact same time, but it let in, on top of your misogyny and xenophobia, it let in the idea of a strong man, be able to get some currency. I think it's still overwhelmingly overblown because
Yeah.
obviously Black men have the largest, voting bloc for for Democratic candidates at all, and white women are the ones we basically should be trying to, goad to actually vote for their interests. However, even when you break down, I think it was NAACP did a breakdown of Black men. Oftentimes, the Black men within the cohort of Black men who are more attributable to support Trump would be foreign-born, first-generation Black men, right?
Oh.
There's even a difference in terms of like the Creole generation, meaning their parents came from Africa or West Indies or the Caribbean, and then
Mhm.
the next generation is kind of fully acculturated with the African American community, and therefore they kind of vote in the exact same way. And
And
so,
that's very indicative of most immigrant communities.
right,
So it's
because
not they're off brand for immigration. It's
it's
just a little
not.
bit off brand for Black people in America, if anything.
Yeah, because your natural instinct is to think that immigrants would naturally be against an anti-immigrant person. A person who's xenophobic and all the rest. But you also have to recognize how kind of white supremacy can work in that you can consider yourself to be the exception to the rule. And if you find this is why you can find the Byron Donalds and the rest of the world and Sage Steels and
Yeah.
what I always derisively call the chickens for KFC, contention. They always believe
Play nice.
that their Colonel Sanders is going to look at them differently than the other chickens. And if you understand history and how that has occurred, it is not how it always
Yeah.
occurs. But they're looking for basically a transactional. And that's kind of like the thing when it comes to particularly talking to younger Black men who are not traditionally tied to, the politics or traditionally tied to the Democratic policy party. The
Mhm.
transactional nature of the culture that they've grown up in. And I'm a former hip hop magazine managing editor of a hip hop magazine, so I love hip hop. But you can't have 50 years worth of transactional types of relationships. What can you do for me? How can I exploit capitalism, hustle and grind culture, and all those things? When you basically
Mhm.
look at Donald Trump, he's a manifestation of that. So yes, they may not really think about the ramifications of things like, police immunity or other things, just thinking to themselves, this guy is a transactional, I can work with him. That was part of the real reason of Ice Cube's whole, Black American, whatever the thing he pops up every 4 years.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That was interesting. I'm kind of
Yeah,
glad we didn't see a reemergence of that, by the way, for 2024.
right.
Um, Going into, I think my final question that I have to ask about is the groundswell that we saw, like the people getting on code information.
Yeah,
We have opportunity now, as you look at the Senate getting together.
yeah,
If this possibly goes with a couple of Democratic wins, you could have more D9 people in the Senate of all things. So you're talking like
yeah, of
Raphael Warnock, who's an alpha,
course.
Lisa Blunt Rochester, I believe she's an AKA,
Uh-huh.
and Angela Also Brooks, who is a
Yeah,
Delta. You have
right,
opportunity for three members of D9 to be in the Senate.
right.
Meanwhile, we have tons in the
In
House
the house.
already,
Yep, yep.
and including, of course, Hakeem Jeffries, who is
Right,
already
right.
the House Minority Leader. Is there a possibility of ever having that type of a groundswell or a let's get Hakeem Jeffries promoted up to the position of House Majority Leader? Like, is there a possibility for maybe us rallying that same way that we just
Mhm.
gave this energy toward the Kamala Harris campaign?
Oh, of course. I mean, one of the things about the Divine Nine, and particularly the fraternities in particular, is that the Divine
Mm-hmm.
Nine fraternities have always worked together. when we talked about, say, for example, the civil rights movement, for example,
Yes.
one of the early things, I'm not trying to center just Alpha on this, but let me just use it as an example.
You're not trying to center alpha,
Yeah, well,
really, sir?
we
Okay.
all alphas, we think of ourselves a little mini Martin Luther King, so I might as well
I
just go.
see. Go on with it. Go on with it.
But I mean, when we talk about some of the earliest civil rights movements, in particular, like the integration of predominantly white institutions, Alpha used to sponsor Kappas, who were being discriminated against and pay for their tuition and books and things like that. Kappas used to the former Polmark of Kappa Alpha Psi, and his name escapes me, right, in the 1950s, used to work as a lawyer with Martin Luther King in order to, progress. So we've always had this tradition. And I think there's also this notion that people don't really understand. It's like you have your rivalries, and that's all fun and games, and some people are immature and they keep those rivalries going. But at the end of the day, when we talk about our stuff, we're Black men. And I'm going to be the very first, when I tell all my college brothers in particular, it was like, if there's another fraternity having an event, you need, as an alpha, to be the very first one there. Because that's the point of it, is that you're a Black man before you're anything else. And to paraphrase, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, excuse me, he was like, they don't hang you because you're an alpha, kappa, sigma, omega, or iota. They hang you because you're Black. And when it comes to the enthusiasm of Hakeem Jeffries, the pride that I take in is the fact that this is a college-educated brother who's just gotten all the way to the majority. I'll be damned if I'm gonna say the day that I, as a life member of Alpha Phi Alpha, former president, chapter president, just a couple of months ago, am not supporting a member of Kappa Alpha Psi for the third highest office. It's the member that is the moment Alpha doesn't mean a damn thing to me. We are going to always be out there to support, our brothers who are, I always say, my brothers from another fraternal mother, and those who have not become a member of an organization. Having said all that, the sororities are way more better organized than the fraternities.
That's what we do.
You all,
What we do.
this is like organization central. I always laugh in that you go to a Delta convention, and if it's red hat day, everybody
Red
wearing
Hat
red
Day.
hat day. You go
It's
to
Red Hat Day.
AKA, you go to the Zetas, you go to Sigma Gamma Rho. If it's blue coat, yellow skirt, it's gonna be that. You go to the Alpha, go to an Alpha event, and we say it's gold jacket day. Alphas, because alphas love arguing, we go, well, I gotta wear a gold jacket. And but we will get there. But it's just our way of doing things are very different than the sororities. It doesn't mean one is better than the other. It just means that we have different manifestations of how we do it. And the clearest thing that I can always say for those who are not familiar with the Divine Nine is that when you are, even on campus, the people who are your people are always your people in different fraternities and sororities. So yes, we will ride hard for Hakeem Jeffries. First of all, because he's a Gen Xer like me, and he comes with Gen Xer hip hop phrases like me. And I'm like, I am hyped from the minute I saw that brother. And I was like, because you want to reflect yourself, and that right there. And I will forgive him for being a noob, but I will be happy as hell to see him sworn in as the Speaker of the House.
You are an absolute delight to interview. I have enjoyed every minute of this. Thank you very much, Lawrence Ross, author of The Divine Nine, The History of African American Fraternities and Sororities. I appreciate having you on today.
Thank you for having me.